The Venezuelan Congress and a founding member of the Mesa de la Unidad Democrática, that's MUD, that's a major government opposition group. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Firstly, I'd like to ask you, describe for us, if you will, we've seen this deadly unrest go on for weeks now. What is the situation in the country?
Well, the situation in Venezuela is critical and it's getting worse every hour that goes by. We're not only facing a humanitarian crisis that has even children looking for food in garbage throughout the streets, but we have today a huge civilian movement that is demonstrating every day in the streets, demanding for profound, deep political change, and you have the dictatorship of Nicolás Maduro ordering the National Guard and the police to repress brutally unarmed citizens that are peacefully demanding for their rights. And that's getting worse, as I say, every day that goes by.
Do you believe that it's at this stage diplomacy can still work, that there can be an effective dialogue between the groups here?
Well, we certainly believe in a democratic transition, and that requires a level of agreement between those in the regime that are today, as I say, repressing brutally, and the huge majority of society, almost 90% of Venezuelan people, demanding for a change. But it is important to understand that we are facing not a conventional dictatorship. It's a dictatorship that has been proven to have complex and deep links with international crime, narco-traffic, mafia, and even extreme terrorist groups. So at this point, you require a certain and big amount of pressure from within, with the people, with people power, peacefully in the street, and certainly from international community.
That being said, what is opposition? What do you want to see change? What do you want to see from the Maduro government? Well,
I want to insist in the fact that today, not only human rights are being violated massively, but the National Assembly, our parliament, has been annihilated by the regime. So we are totally out of our constitutional framework, and what we are requiring, as I say, is a regime change to bring back the rule of law and democratic institutions in Venezuela. We certainly believe that with all this huge pressure in the street, which is going to be maintained at this point, what we require is the regime to understand, and we want the regime to understand, it's their best and only option to step aside and to create a transitional government of unity in which the whole society could be represented in order to move ahead in a transition process that brings back institutions, democratic institutions of Venezuela, but also that would address the humanitarian crisis that is transforming into a catastrophe as we speak.
We've seen President Maduro call for the creation of a constituent assembly. What do you make of this?
Well, that's his last and desperate move to not only ignore Parliament, but the Constitution, and to install a new text based in the Cuban Constitution, and he wants to formally install his dictatorship, communist dictatorship in Venezuela, ignoring the legitimate parliament, which was elected a year and a half ago, and which was won by a huge majority by the democratic forces.
We've got regional elections that are scheduled, at least should be held this year. Of course, the presidential election is set for 2018. Do you see that the country can successfully hold these elections? Is it possible to get there?
It is important to understand that Nicolás Maduro and his regime has blocked every single institutional way that the democratic forces taken or moved ahead. Not only the regional elections for governors that should have taken place last year, but also the recall referendum, which its requirements were well accomplished with millions of petitions by the people last year. So it is obvious that this regime, Maduro's dictatorship, is not willing to hold any election whatsoever. And that's why they have come up with this idea of a new constitution in order to gain time, to win time, in order to demobilize citizens in the streets and to make the international community believe that they're willing to count themselves in any one or other way. But that is not true. This is a regime, as I said, that has turned Venezuela into a narco-state and that is willing to do anything to stay in power, and that's why they are killing innocent students and women that are protesting peacefully, unarmed, in our streets to demand, yes, food, but also freedom, dignity, and justice for Venezuela.
What are we seeing from the military? This week we saw dozens of personnel detained. Of course, we do know that the military has been supporting President Maduro and his regime, but could there be a split within the armed forces?
Absolutely, and that is the main issue right now. Today, the only support Nicolás Maduro has left is the armed forces. Maduro is totally isolated internationally as well as locally. Even his own people that used to support this so-called revolution, today are in the streets demanding for change. So this issue regarding what's going to happen with the armed forces is finally what's going to define where Venezuela move ahead, either through a stronger and more totalitarian scenario or an outspring of democracy and freedom. My opinion in the contact I have with soldiers and guards and policemen throughout our country in these last days is that they do realize the strength that has been brought out in the streets. They have families, wives, children that do not have food and medicines in Venezuela today. They have to go back to their houses and they find the recrimination of their own families because they're shooting to young students. So I believe that this support to Maduro from the armed forces is starting to fade away, and I am convinced that a democratic transition in order to bring back security, stability, and leave behind chaos, the chaos this regime has brought to Venezuela, is close. We need more than ever the voices of the international democratic community understanding the degree of the catastrophe that's taken place in Venezuela and the possibility, the true possibility to move ahead in a sustainable, ordered, and peaceful transition to democracy and freedom in our country soon.
Maria Corina Machado, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. We do appreciate it.